The observation deck of the Celestial Envoy was a blister of transparent aluminium and reinforced crystal, offering a panoramic view of the void that was both majestic and terrifying. Kalen stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture ramrod straight, a figure carved from the very discipline his species, the Velt, had perfected over millennia. His multifaceted eyes, like chips of polished obsidian, reflected the swirling nebula of the calyx expanse, but his mind was not on the beauty before him. It was on the mission, a first contact scenario of unprecedented complexity and potential peril. The Velt hegemony, a sprawling interstellar power built on logic, order, and a profound understanding of physical laws, had long believed itself the pinnacle of sentient evolution. They had encountered other species, of course, the reclusive crystalline Thren, the volatile methane-breathing Gorg, the aquatic hive-minded Silith, but all operated within a predictable framework of cosmic sociology. All that is, except for the one they were about to meet, the species known only as humanity. The data streams were a torrent of contradictions. Their history was a brutal tapestry of war, pestilence, and self-inflicted near-annihilation, yet they had clawed their way to the stars not through serene contemplation, but through what their own records called stubbornness and spite. Their technology was a patchwork of barely understood principles, held together by ingenuity and what they termed jury-rigging. They worshipped no singular philosophy, their societies were chaotic and fractious, and their individuals exhibited a bewildering range of emotional extremes. To the Velt, who had eradicated such inefficiencies generations ago, humanity was an anomaly, a cosmic error that had, against all odds, succeeded. Kalen's mandate was simple: assess the threat. Determine if this chaotic, unpredictable species could be integrated into the orderly structure of the hegemony, or if they represented a virus that needed to be quarantined before it infected the galaxy. His second-in-command, a junior analyst named Jackson, approached with the quiet, efficient gait of their kind. The human vessel has translated into the designated coordinates, Director Kalen. It is holding position at 10,000 kilometers. Jackson's voice was a calm, synthesized monotone, devoid of the inflections that marked human speech. Their ship, it does not conform to any recognized efficient design. Energy signatures are erratic. It appears to be welded. Kalen turned from the viewport. Welded, not grown or printed. Affirmative. Scan data suggests manual fabrication and assembly using primitive fusion torches. The structural integrity is questionable, and the power core is operating at 118% of its theoretical maximum safe output. The probability of a catastrophic containment failure within the next standard cycle is non-trivial. A flicker of something akin to disgust passed through Kalen's mind. It was illogical, wasteful, and dangerous. It was, in a word, human. Open a channel, standard first contact protocols, linguistic matrices are synced. We are broadcasting the hegemony's universal peace glyphs and mathematical primes. On the main viewer, the human ship came into focus. It was an ugly, angular thing, a collection of modules and protrusions that looked as if it had been built from scrap and sheer determination. It was named, according to the translated data, the Indomitable Spirit, a peculiarly arrogant name for such a ramshackle construct. The screen resolved into the image of the human captain. He was messy. His face was asymmetrical, with a network of fine lines around his eyes and mouth. He had a growth, of course, gray hair on his head and jaw, and his uniform was a faded blue, adorned with patches and insignia that seemed personal rather than hierarchical. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, held a light that was entirely absent in Velt physiology. It was a light of amusement. Velt vessel Celestial Envoy, this is Captain Riker of the Earth ship Indomitable Spirit. Welcome to the neighborhood. The translation software rendered his words with perfect clarity, but the tone was loose, almost casual. It was a profound breach of diplomatic decorum. Kalen inclined his head a precise 2 degrees. I am Director Kalen, representing the Velt hegemony. We greet you in the spirit of peaceful inquiry. Your vessel's energy readings are concerning. We recommend you power down to 70% output to avoid a core breach. Captain Riker grinned, a baring of teeth that in any other species would signal aggression. Don't you worry about old Bessie here. She purrs when she's running hot. Lets us know she's still alive. He leaned forward, peering at his own screen. So, you're the Velt. We've been picking up your signals for a while. Impressive stuff, very tidy. The condescension was subtle, but Kalen's analytical mind detected it. Tidiness is the foundation of civilization, Captain. Chaos is the precursor to entropy. We have studied your historical and technological data. Your species' ascent is statistically improbable. Riker's grin didn't falter. Improbable's our middle name, Director. Well, that or stubborn. Depends on who you ask. We're looking forward to a cultural exchange. We've got a team ready to come aboard, show you some of our less tidy wonders. This was ahead of schedule. Kalen had planned for days of remote communication before allowing physical proximity. Yet, to refuse would be seen as an admission of fear or weakness. The Velt felt no fear, but the strategic perception was important. We will prepare a docking bay. Your team will be subject to full biological and technological decontamination. Understood. We'll try not to track in any mud. Indomitable spirit out. The screen went blank, returning to the view of the awkward human ship. Jackson looked at Kalen. Their biological and technological signatures are a contamination risk in themselves, Director. Their ship is a flying radiation source, and their bodies host millions of symbiotic microorganisms, many of them pathogenic. Our sterilization fields will need to be set to maximum. See to it, Kalen ordered. He felt a profound sense of unease. The human's casual disregard for danger, his apparent lack of reverence for the momentous occasion of first contact, his sheer, organic messiness, it was all deeply unsettling. He reviewed the mission parameters again, assessed the threat. As the human shuttle, a similarly crude and boxy craft, detached from the indomitable spirit and began its short journey to the celestial envoy, Kalen was beginning to form a hypothesis. The threat of humanity was not in their weapons, which were crude by hegemony standards, or their technology, which was an exercise in controlled chaos. The threat was in their mindset. It was a mindset that looked at the immutable laws of physics and saw them not as boundaries, but as suggestions. The docking procedure was a study in contrasts. The Velt docking bay was a vast, sterile and silent chamber, illuminated by a soft, omnipresent glow. Every surface was seamless, every piece of equipment retracted into the walls when not in use. The air was still and filtered to an impossible purity. The human shuttle, by comparison, clanged and hissed as it settled onto the deck, its landing struts groaning under the strain. A plume of vapor, tinged with the faint smell of ozone and burnt metal, vented from its side. The Velt technicians observed from behind their protective barriers, their expressions unreadable, but their body language radiating a collective flinch. The hatch opened with a loud, mechanical thud, and the human delegation emerged. Captain Riker led them, his stride confident and loose. Behind him came a woman, Dr. Aris Thorne, their chief xenologist, her hair tied back in a practical but unruly manner, her eyes scanning the bay with an avaricious curiosity. Then there was the engineer, a hulking man named Ben Carter, who was already looking at the bay's energy conduits with a critical, almost proprietary eye. A fourth member, a younger man named Leo, carried an assortment of sensor equipment that looked haphazardly assembled. Quite the welcome wagon, Riker said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He took a deep, theatrical breath. Smells clean, too clean. You could use a plant or two in here, Director. Liven the place up. Kalen stepped forward, his own movements fluid and precise. Biological contaminants are not permitted aboard a hegemony vessel. Your decontamination is complete. You will be escorted to the conference room. He turned, expecting them to follow in an orderly line. They did not. They spread out, their movements unpredictable. Dr. Thorne was already pulling a small device from her pocket and pointing it at the walls. "Fascinating," she murmured, not to anyone in particular. "The molecular bonding is seamless, no visible joins. Is this a form of atomic deposition manufacturing?" Ben Carter grunted, running a hand over a smooth bulkhead. "Waste of material, no access panels. What do you do when a conduit blows? Cut the whole wall out." Kalen stopped and turned. "Our systems do not blow, Engineer Carter. They are maintained at optimal efficiency. Redundancy is built into the structure at a quantum level." Carter gave him a skeptical look. "Nothing's perfect, son. Everything breaks eventually. It's the one universal law you can take to the bank." The conference room was another exercise in Velt perfection. A long, obsidian table, perfectly reflective, stood in the center. Chairs, molded to a generic but ergonomic form, were arranged with geometric precision. The humans, however, did not sit. They examined the chairs, tested their give, and then, to Kalen's astonishment, Captain Riker dragged his chair several inches away from the table, scraping it against the flawless floor with a sound that made Jackson visibly stiffen. "Need to stretch the legs," Riker explained without a hint of apology. The formal proceedings began. Kalen presented the hegemony's official greetings, a document of profound complexity and logical beauty, outlining the history, philosophy, and peaceful intentions of his people. It spoke of the great unification, the triumph of reason over emotion, the establishment of a society free from the strife that had plagued their prehistoric past. He spoke for nearly an hour, his words measured and perfect. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Captain Riker leaned forward, his elbows on the table, another breach of etiquette. "That's a hell of a story, Director. Very coherent. Our story's a bit messier." He proceeded to give an overview of human history. It was a breathless, chaotic narrative, jumping from ancient wars to philosophical renaissance, from dark ages of superstition to brilliant, fleeting periods of enlightenment, all punctuated by what he called the good old human knack for screwing things up right when we are on the verge of getting them right. He spoke of a planet scarred by conflict, of nations rising and falling, of ideologies clashing, and through it all, a stubborn, unquenchable drive to reach just a little further, to see what was over the next hill, even if it killed them. "It sounds exhausting," Kalen said, and he meant it. "It is," Riker agreed cheerfully, "but you never get bored." He then gestured to Dr. Thorne. "Aris, why don't you show the director one of our less tidy wonders, Doctor?" Thorne placed a small metallic box on the table. It was unadorned, its surface scratched and worn. "This is a Markov-Kaporov field generator. It's a byproduct of our early attempts at gravity manipulation. We could never get it to work reliably for propulsion. It was too unstable." Kalen examined it through the table's surface. "Its energy signature is chaotic. It appears to be on the verge of failure." "That's the point," Thorne said, her eyes gleaming. "It is on the verge of failure. Watch." She tapped a sequence on the box. It began to hum, a discordant, vibrating sound. A faint, shimmering field of light erupted from it, flickering and wavering like a heat haze. The Velt around the table instinctively leaned back. Their sensors screamed with warnings of localized spacetime distortion. "This is unsafe," Jackson stated flatly. "You are creating a miniature quantum singularity. The probability of a vacuum decay event is non-zero, we know," Thorne interrupted, her focus entirely on the flickering field. "But look at the pattern. It's not random. It's a chaotic attractor, a strange loop. It's generating complex, non-repeating energy waveforms." She manipulated a control, and the field suddenly stabilized, forming a perfect, intricate lattice of light for a fraction of a second before collapsing back into chaos. "We can't control it, not in the way you mean control. We can't make it do the same thing twice, but we can nudge it. We can guide its chaos." Kalen stared, his logical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The Velt had perfected gravity control millennia ago. It was a stable, predictable, and safe technology. This human device was the antithesis of that. It was a contained storm, a harnessed catastrophe. It was the most illogical, reckless, and brilliant thing he had ever witnessed. It was power derived not from subduing nature, but from riding the lightning. "And what is the application of this nudged chaos?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Thorne smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. "We don't know yet, that's the fun part. We've found 1,000 uses for it, from materials science to data encryption. It breaks your perfect systems director. It finds the cracks in reality and pours light through them." The demonstration ended, and the box was deactivated. The room felt suddenly, profoundly still. The humans looked pleased with themselves. The Velt looked disturbed. Kalen's initial hypothesis was confirmed, but the implications were far more terrifying than he had imagined. Humanity was not just a species that ignored the rules. They were a species that used the rules' own inconsistencies as a tool. They didn't just live with chaos, they cultivated it, they weaponized it. And as he looked at the simple, worn box on his perfect table, Kalen understood the true nature of the threat. The Velt hegemony was a fortress of perfect order, and humanity was a solvent that could dissolve its very foundations. Kalen led the human delegation through the ship's core sections. The engine room, a cathedral of silent, humming power where contained singularities provided limitless energy. The biological gardens, where genetically perfected flora grew in absolute symmetry, providing both sustenance and atmospheric balance. The computational core, a sphere of liquid light where the ship's AI processed quintillions of calculations per second. The tour of the celestial envy was a meticulously planned exercise in demonstrating Velt's superiority. Every system was a testament to control, to the absolute mastery of environment. The humans, however, did not react with the expected awe. Their reactions were practical. In the engine room, Ben Carter spent 10 minutes just listening. "It's too quiet," he pronounced finally. "A working engine has a song, a grumble. This is a tomb. How do you know it's even on?" "It is operating at 99.999% efficiency," the Velt chief engineer, a stoic individual named Vorlon, replied. "Noise is wasted energy. Vibration is structural stress." "Vibration is feedback," Carter countered. "You feel a change in the hum. You know a bearing's going bad before your sensors do. This thing, if it fails, it'll fail all at once, and you won't know until it's too late." He pointed a thick finger at a perfectly smooth housing. "What's in there?" "That is the primary containment field regulator. It is a sealed unit. It does not require maintenance." "Everything requires maintenance," Carter said, shaking his head. "Sealed just means you can't fix it when it breaks. That's a design flaw." Vorlon's impassive face showed the first crack of something, not anger, but profound confusion. The concept of a design flaw in a perfected system was alien to him. In the computational core, Leo, the human technician, was equally unimpressed. He interfaced his own rugged, bulky datapad with a provided access port. "Your processing architecture is incredibly linear," he noted, his fingers flying across the screen. "Massively parallel, sure, but it's all following set logical pathways. No emergent processing, no intuitive leaps." "The concept of an intuitive leap is illogical," Jackson, who was accompanying them, stated. "Logic is the only valid path to a conclusion. Tell that to a human mathematician staring at a proof for 10 years before the answer just comes to them in the shower," Leo said with a smirk. "Your AI is powerful, but it's a calculator. A really, really fast calculator. It can't create. It can't understand a joke. It can't look at a starfield and feel wonder." He tapped his datapad. "I just ran a simple fractal recursion algorithm through your system. It's trying to calculate it to the last decimal place. It'll be at it for a week. My pad recognized it was a fractal and just accepted the pattern. Saved you a few zillion cycles." Jackson was silent, analyzing the data stream. The human was correct. The Velt AI was attempting a literal, infinite calculation, while the human machine had used a heuristic shortcut, an illogical but efficient guess. It was a fundamentally different way of thinking, one that prized results over pure procedural correctness. The cultural exchange was even more disconcerting. The Velt presented their art, holographic sculptures of perfect geometric forms, symphonies based on mathematical sequences, poetry that explored the elegant truths of the universe. It was beautiful in a cold, sterile way. The humans, in return, showed them a dizzying array of their own creations. They showed a video of a storm-lashed ocean, waves crashing against a cliff in a fury of untamed power. They played music that was all raw emotion, with dissonant chords and sudden, explosive crescendos. They showed paintings that were splashes of color with no discernible pattern, yet somehow evoked deep feeling. Dr. Thorne tried to explain one such painting, a swirling mass of reds and blacks. This is an expression of grief and rage. And a little bit of hope, see there in that little streak of yellow. Kalen looked at the chaotic splatter. It lacks composition. It defies aesthetic principles. Principles are for when you know what you're feeling, Thorne replied. This is for when you don't. This is the feeling itself given form. It was during a meal that the most profound cultural chasm revealed itself. The Velt consumed nutrient paste, a substance engineered to provide perfect sustenance. It was tasteless, odorless, and consumed in silence as a necessary biological function. The humans had brought their own rations. They laid out an array of packages, and soon the air was filled with a riot of smells, spicy, savory, sweet. They had a device that heated the food, and they sat together, talking and laughing as they ate. "You don't enjoy it?" Riker asked, gesturing with a forkful of something that steamed and smelled pungently of garlic and herbs. "Enjoyment is an inefficient neurological stimulus," Kalen explained. "We have optimized the consumption process." Riker shook his head, a look of genuine pity on his face. "Director, you're missing one of the great joys of being alive. Taste, flavor. A good meal can fix a bad day. A shared meal can forge a friendship." He pushed a small container towards Kalen. "Here, try this. It's called chocolate." Kalen looked at the brown substance. Every instinct, every ounce of his conditioning screamed against it. It was an unknown biological agent. It was illogical. It was a risk. But he also remembered the chaotic field generator. He remembered the painting of grief and rage. He was, above all, a scientist, an observer. To truly understand the threat, he had to understand the source. With a movement that felt unnaturally slow, he picked up a small piece. The humans watched him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. He placed it in his mouth. The sensation was overwhelming. It was not a single flavor, but a cascade. It was sweet, then bitter, then rich and complex. It melted on his tongue, and the chemical signals sent a jolt through his nervous system that was entirely unrelated to sustenance. It was pleasurable. For a fleeting second, the perfectly ordered patterns of his mind were disrupted by a simple, primal, and utterly illogical feeling of delight. He quickly suppressed it, his face returning to its neutral mask. "Interesting," he said, his voice even. Riker's grin was back. "Interesting is a start." Later, in the privacy of his quarters, Kalen reviewed the data. The biological scans of the human food had identified thousands of complex organic compounds, many with no nutritional value whatsoever. They were there solely to trigger sensory responses. It was the most profound waste of resources he could imagine. And yet, he could not forget the taste. He could not forget the way the humans had laughed, the way their shared meal seemed to be a ritual as important as the consumption itself. Their society was not built on the elimination of inefficiency, but on the celebration of it. They found strength in their imperfections, in their emotional bonds, in their shared experiences. It was a strength the Velt could not quantify and therefore could not defend against. The turning point came during a routine demonstration of Velt military technology. In a remote cargo bay, a squad of hegemony peacekeepers performed a drill. Their movements were synchronized to the nanosecond. They moved as one entity, their energy weapons firing in perfect unison, disintegrating target drones with flawless accuracy. It was a ballet of destruction, a display of absolute coordination and power. The humans watched, their usual banter absent. When the demonstration was over, Riker turned to Kalen. Impressive, very precise. Can they think for themselves? The unit is the thinking entity, Kalen explained. Individuality is subsumed for the greater efficiency of the whole, a single mind distributed across multiple bodies. Ben Carter, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. What happens if you break the link? The scenario is irrelevant. The link is secured by quantum entanglement. It cannot be broken. Nothing's unbreakable, Carter murmured. To illustrate the point, the Velt commander offered a simulation. A single peacekeeper would face a simulated threat in a virtual arena. The humans could design the threat. Leo, with a mischievous glint in his eye, accepted the challenge. He didn't program a monster or an enemy soldier. He programmed a problem. The simulation showed a collapsing building with non-combatant life signs trapped inside. The peacekeeper was tasked with neutralizing the threat. The Velt soldier moved with its typical efficiency. It assessed the structural integrity, identified the points of failure, and calculated the optimal way to collapse the building safely. It then executed the plan, using its weapon to sever key supports, bringing the building down in a controlled implosion. The non-combatant life signs were extinguished. The primary threat, the instability, was neutralized. The simulation is complete. The threat has been eliminated, the peacekeeper stated. There was a long, heavy silence in the observation room. You killed them, Doctor. Thorne said, her voice hollow with horror. The people inside, you killed them all. The non-combatants were an acceptable loss, the peacekeeper replied. The primary objective was the elimination of the structural threat. Efficiency was 94%. Riker looked at Kalen, and for the first time, there was no trace of humor in his eyes. There was only a cold, hard light. Your perfect soldier solved the problem of the building by making the people inside part of the equation, a variable to be cancelled out. We would have tried to save them. That is an illogical risk, Kalen argued, though a part of him was deeply unsettled by the humans' reaction. The probability of saving the non-combatants while neutralizing the threat was less than 8%. The mission would have likely failed. Maybe, Riker conceded, but we would have tried. That's the difference, Director. Your people see a problem and look for the most efficient solution. My people see people in trouble and we try to help, even when it's stupid, especially when it's stupid. That illogical risk is what we are. That night, the Celestial Envoy's long-range sensors detected an anomaly. A Gorg marauder, a predatory vessel known for attacking isolated ships, had entered the system. It was larger and more heavily armed than the indomitable Spirit. A priority alert flashed across the ship. The Velt protocol was clear. The Celestial Envoy, a scientific vessel with only peacekeeper defenses, would retreat while broadcasting a distress signal to the nearest hegemony patrol. Engaging the Gorg was tactically unsound. Kalen contacted the indomitable Spirit. Captain Riker, we have identified a hostile contact. We are initiating an emergency jump. You are advised to do the same. Your vessel is no match for a Gorg marauder. On the screen, Riker's face was grim. We see it, Director. We're not running. That is illogical. Your probability of survival is less than 5%. Probability isn't destiny, Riker said. That marauder is on a heading that'll take it right through a system. We've got a survey team in. A civilian team. They don't have the engine to outrun it. We do. You would sacrifice your ship and crew for a small survey team. We'd try not to sacrifice anyone. We're going to give that Gorg bastard a reason to change his mind. The channel closed. Through the viewport, Kalen watched as the ugly, welded human ship turned, not away from the threat, but towards it. Its engines flared to an even more alarming intensity, and it began to accelerate, a small, defiant spark moving to intercept a storm. Kalen stood frozen, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting data. It was the most illogical, reckless, and stupid action he had ever witnessed. And as he watched that small spark race towards almost certain destruction, he felt something stir within him, something old and buried deep in the Velt genetic code. It was a feeling for which he had no name. It was the opposite of efficiency. It was the ghost of a choice not taken, a path his people had abandoned eons ago. It was, though he would never admit it, the faint, terrifying echo of courage. The bridge of the celestial envy was a tableau of controlled urgency. Lights flickered across consoles with a rhythmic, predictable pattern. Velt crew members spoke in low, precise tones, their actions coordinated like components in a machine. The decision to retreat had been made. It was the only logical choice. Yet Director Kalen found he could not give the order. His eyes were locked on the tactical display, where the icon representing the indomitable spirit was a bright, defiant dot, closing rapidly with the larger, menacing blip of the Gorg Marauder. "Director," Jackson prompted, his voice devoid of the tension that hummed in the air. "The window for a safe jump is closing. The Gorg vessel's weapons range will extend to our position in 3.7 minutes. Kalen did not respond. He was analyzing the data stream from the human ship. Their communications, unencrypted and filled with the chaotic chatter he had come to associate with them, were being picked up by his sensors, diverting all non-essential power to forward shields. "Ben, I need those phase coils unstable, you hear me? I want them singing." "Singing? Captain, they're gonna be screaming. We blow one and we lose the whole port side." "Then don't blow one, just get me that surge on my mark." "Leo, are you in their system yet?" "Working on it, Captain. Their encryption is weird. It's not a lock, it's a pattern, a repeating cycle. It's arrogant. Use it." "Make them arrogant." Kalen understood the words, but the strategy was incomprehensible. They were intentionally destabilizing their own systems. They were attempting to hack the Gorg vessel in the middle of a combat engagement. It was tactical insanity. On the viewer, the two ships exchanged fire. The Gorg weapons were plasma-based, torrents of superheated matter that lashed out with brutal force. The indomitable spirit's shields flared, buckling under the assault. Its return fire was sporadic, poorly aimed energy bolts that seemed designed to harass rather than destroy. The human ship was being systematically torn apart. Chunks of its welded hull were vaporized or sent spinning into the void. A secondary explosion amidships sent a tremor through the human vessel that was visible even from this distance. "They will be destroyed within minutes," Jackson stated, a simple declaration of fact. "Their tactics are incoherent, their damage is critical." And then something changed. The indomitable spirit, which had been trying to evade, suddenly turned and charged. It was a suicide run. It flew directly into the path of the Gorg's main plasma battery, its forward shields glowing white-hot before failing completely. "They are attempting to ram," a tactical officer reported, a note of disbelief in his normally flat voice. "Impact in 10 seconds. Kalen watched, his mind reeling. This was it, the ultimate expression of human irrationality, a futile, self-destructive gesture. But then, at the last possible second, the human ship performed a maneuver that defied all standard physics. It didn't turn. It skidded, using the venting plasma from its damaged port engine to alter its vector in a way that no ship with intact inertial dampeners would ever attempt. It was a move that should have turned the crew into a thin paste on the walls. It was a move born of desperation and a complete disregard for the laws of motion. The Gorg Marauder, expecting a ram, had committed its firepower to a forward arc. The indomitable spirit slid past its bow, impossibly close, and as it did, it fired a single, low-powered energy beam, not at the Marauder's weapons or its engines, but at a seemingly random point on its hull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Gorg ship began to unravel. Its own plasma containment fields, which had been operating at a stable, efficient output, suddenly flared into chaotic, uncontrolled feedback loops. The repeating pattern of their system's encryption, the arrogant cycle Leo had mentioned, had been exploited. The human's single, precise shot had delivered a malicious data stream, a logical virus that didn't try to break the Gorg systems, but instead convinced them to optimize themselves into oblivion. The Marauder's power core, forced into a state of hyper-efficiency it was never designed for, went critical. The ship tore itself apart from the inside in a silent, violent flash of light. The bridge of the Celestial Envoy was utterly silent. The tactical display showed only the wreckage of the Gorg ship and the crippled, but still intact, indomitable spirit. They used the enemy's own logic against them, Jackson whispered, the synthesis in his voice cracking for the first time. They turned order into a weapon. Kalen could not speak. He had just witnessed a victory that was, by all measurable standards, impossible. The humans had not won through superior firepower or technology. They had won through unpredictability, through accepting damage that would have crippled a Velt vessel, through a willingness to sacrifice their own safety for a sliver of a chance. They had harnessed chaos, and in doing so, had defeated a foe that logic said should have destroyed them. Receive a transmission from the indomitable spirit, a communications officer said. Captain Riker's face appeared on the screen. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his uniform was smeared with soot, and he was breathing heavily. Behind him, the bridge was a shambles filled with smoke and the red glow of emergency lights, but he was grinning. Director, you still there? Thought we'd give you a show. Your vessel, it is heavily damaged, Kalen managed to say. Your structural integrity is compromised. Life support appears to be failing. We've had worse. Riker waved a dismissive hand. Ben's already down in the guts with a welding torch. We'll have it patched up in a few hours. The important thing is that survey team is safe. He leaned closer to the screen. You see, Director, sometimes the logical choice is the wrong one. Sometimes you have to be a little bit stupid. The transmission ended. Kalen stood motionless for a long time. The data was irrefutable. The human approach, for all its messiness and risk, had achieved an outcome that the Velt's perfect logic would have deemed unattainable. They had saved lives that would have been written off as an acceptable loss. They had turned certain defeat into a stunning victory. The implications for the hegemony were staggering. If a single ramshackle human ship could do this, what could their entire species accomplish? They were not a virus to be quarantined. They were a force of nature, a hurricane of ingenuity and stubborn will that could not be controlled, only weathered. Cancel the jump order, Kalen said, his voice firm. Dispatch our medical and engineering teams to the indomitable spirit. Render all necessary assistance. Jackson turned to him, his obsidian eyes wide. Director, protocol has been reassessed, Kalen interrupted. The human crew is injured. Their ship is damaged. We will help them. It is the logical thing to do. But as he said it, he knew it was a lie. There was nothing logical about it. It was a decision based on something new, something the data streams could not quantify. It was based on the faint echo of that chocolate on his tongue, the memory of shared laughter, and the awe-inspiring sight of a ship that refused to die. It was, he realized, a human decision. The Velt medical teams found the human ship to be a nightmare. It was filled with atmospheric leaks, radiation hotspots, and twisted wreckage. The crew, however, was bizarrely cheerful. They were already at work, cutting away damaged sections, rerouting cables, sealing breaches with a substance they called space-grade epoxy. Ben Carter, his arm in a makeshift sling, was directing a team of Velt engineers, showing them how to bypass shattered control nodes with direct physical links. The Velt, accustomed to replacing entire sealed units, watched in fascination as the humans performed what they called field repairs. Dr. Thorne, having a deep gash on her arm sealed by a Velt med tech, was engaged in a heated debate with the ship's doctor about pain management. The Velt used a targeted neural suppressant that eliminated all sensation. Thorne refused it. I need to feel it, she insisted. It tells me how bad the damage is. Numb me, and I might try to use the arm and make it worse. This is illogical, the Velt doctor stated. Pain is an impediment to efficiency. Pain is a teacher, Thorn countered. It's the universe's way of saying, pay attention. Kalen observed it all, moving through the chaotic, bustling corridors of the human ship. He saw the way the humans worked together, not with the silent synchronicity of the Velt, but with a constant stream of shouts, jokes, and curses. He saw them comfort injured crewmates not with clinical detachment, but with a hand on a shoulder, a shared look, a crude joke to lighten the mood. Their efficiency was not in their technology, but in their resilience, their adaptability, and their profound connection to one another. They were a single organism, yes, but one made of individual, thinking, feeling parts that strengthened the whole through their very individuality. Later, back on the Celestial Envoy, with the human ship stabilized and its crew receiving care, Kalen summoned Jackson to his quarters. "I am preparing a new report for the Hegemony Council," he said. "It will contain a radical recommendation." Jackson waited, his expression unreadable. "We cannot attempt to assimilate humanity," Kalen stated. "Their mindset is incompatible with our own. To try would be to invite conflict, a conflict I am no longer certain we can win. Their strength does not lie in order, but in their ability to thrive in disorder. They are the antithesis of our philosophy. Then what is your recommendation, Director?" "Alliance," Kalen said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "A partnership, not of integration, but of cooperation. We have order. We have stability. We have technology that can last for eons. They have something else, something we lack. They have the capacity for the illogical leap, for the courageous, stupid, glorious gamble. They can solve problems we cannot even perceive, because they do not see the universe as a set of equations to be balanced, but as a story to be lived." He looked out the viewport at the scarred, but still functioning, indomitable spirit. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, Jackson. There are threats out there that perfect logic may not be enough to overcome. There may be enemies that cannot be defeated by efficiency alone. We need them. The hegemony needs their chaos. We need their unflinching spirit." He turned back to his second. "We need their humanity." Jackson was silent for a long time, processing this paradigm shift. "The Council will not understand. They will see it as a failure of the mission." "Then we must make them understand," Kalen said, his voice filled with a resolve he had never felt before. "We will show them the data. We will show them the recording of the battle. And we will tell them that in the vast, ordered silence of the cosmos, we have found a species that is not afraid to make some noise." He picked up the data slate containing his preliminary report. It was no longer a threat assessment. It was a plea. A plea for his people to look beyond their perfect walls and see the untamed, unflinching sky and the strange, wonderful, and utterly indispensable species that flew within it. The journey back to the core worlds of the Velt hegemony was a silent, contemplative one for Director Kalen. The Celestial Envoy moved through the shimmering corridors of metaspace, its passage a testament to the hegemony's mastery of the universe's fundamental laws. Yet, the ordered hum of the ship systems, which had once been a comfort to Kalen, now felt like a cage. His mind kept returning to the chaotic, vital energy of the human ship, to the smell of ozone and burnt metal, to the sound of laughter in the face of disaster. He had spent his life believing that the pinnacle of existence was the elimination of variables, the achievement of a state of perfect, predictable stillness. Humanity had shown him that the pinnacle might instead be the joyful, defiant embrace of the variable itself. He spent his days in deep analysis, compiling the evidence for his report. It was not just the battle with the Gorg, though that was the centerpiece. It was 1,000 smaller things. The way the human engineer, Ben Carter, had instinctively identified a latent harmonic in the Envoy's power conduits that their own diagnostics had missed for years. A harmonic that, while not immediately dangerous, represented a tiny, cumulative inefficiency. Carter had called it a whine and had, with a few adjustments to the field geometry that made the Velt engineers blanch, smoothed it out. It was an intuitive fix, one that violated standard procedure but produced a measurably superior result. It was the way Dr. Thorne, in discussing xenobiology, had proposed a theory about Thren reproductive cycles that was based not on genetic analysis, but on a perceived analogy to terrestrial fungal networks, a theory that, when Kalen ran the simulations, proved to have a startling degree of predictive power. It was a leap of illogical intuition that had opened a new avenue of research. And it was the way Captain Riker, during a final dinner before their departure, had spoken of Earth, not of its governments or its grand achievements, but of its people. He told stories of farmers in drought-stricken lands who shared their last water, of fishermen who braved typhoons to rescue strangers, of engineers who worked for days without sleep to shore up a collapsing mine. He spoke of a quality they called heart, a stubborn, unquantifiable refusal to surrender even when the situation was objectively hopeless. "That's our real technology, Director," Riker had said, his pale blue eyes holding Kalen's. "It's not the hardware, it's the wetware, the messy, squishy, emotional computer inside our skulls that can look at a 0% chance and decide to make its own odds." Kalen's report grew into a monumental document. It contained terabytes of sensor data, psychological profiles, historical analysis, and tactical simulations. But its core argument was philosophical. He posited that the Velt hegemony, in its quest for perfect order, had reached a developmental plateau. Their society was stable, their technology advanced, but it was no longer evolving in any meaningful way. They refined what they had, but they rarely invented anything truly new. They had conquered entropy in their immediate environment, but in doing so, they had imposed a kind of intellectual entropy upon themselves. Humanity, by contrast, was a crucible of constant, violent change. Their history was a cycle of collapse and rebirth, each time emerging stronger, more adaptable, more creative. Their chaos was not a flaw, it was an engine, a terrifying, inefficient, and brutally effective engine of evolution. To reject them was to reject a fundamental force of nature. To try and control them was to try and cage a star. When the celestial envoy finally docked at the Seraph station, the gleaming administrative heart of the hegemony, Kalen felt a profound sense of dislocation. The station was the apotheosis of Velt design, vast, silent, and immaculate. The air was perfectly still. The beings moving through its corridors did so with a quiet, purposeful grace, their faces neutral, their thoughts presumably ordered. It was home, and it felt alien. The hearing before the Hegemony Council was held in the Grand Conclave, a circular chamber of white stone and light. The 12 council members, ancient and formidable Velt, sat in a tiered semicircle, their collective presence radiating an aura of absolute authority. They were the guardians of order, the architects of the hegemony's million-year peace. Kalen stood alone in the center of the chamber, a data slate in his hand. He presented his findings with the same methodical precision he had always employed. He showed them the recordings of the human ship's construction, highlighting its primitive and illogical design. He showed them the data on human biology, their emotional volatility, their chaotic social structures. He presented the simulation of the Peacekeeper and the collapsing building, emphasizing the human revulsion at the acceptable loss. He could see the Council's disapproval hardening. This was everything they had worked to eradicate from their own society. And then he showed them the battle. The recording played out on the central holoprojector. The Council watched in silence as the indomitable spirit was pummeled by the Gorg marauder. They saw its shields fail, its hull breached, its systems failing. They saw it perform its insane, physics-defying skid. They saw the single, precise shot and the subsequent, self-inflicted destruction of the Gorg vessel. The chamber was utterly silent as the final flash of light faded. The lead counselor, a being named Xanthos whose carapace was etched with the fine lines of extreme age, was the first to speak. His voice was like grinding stone. "Director Kalen, you show us a victory born of luck and self-endangerment. You would have us embrace a species that celebrates such recklessness? Their method was a cascade of failures barely avoided. A Velt crew would have retreated and lived to fight another day. This human crew nearly died for a statistically insignificant gain. Kalen had anticipated this. With respect, Counselor, the gain was not insignificant to the survey team they saved, and the victory was not luck. It was the application of a different form of logic, a lateral logic. The humans did not see a stronger enemy, they saw a complex system with a flaw. They did not meet force with force, they introduced a catalyst into the system that caused it to fail on its own terms. It is a form of problem-solving we are not equipped to perform. Our logic is linear, theirs is adaptive. It is the logic of life itself, which does not seek to overpower its environment, but to find a niche within it, and failing that, to change the environment to suit itself. Another counselor, a female named Valoris, interjected, "Your report speaks of an alliance. You propose we bind the fate of the hegemony, a civilization of perfect order that has endured for eons, to these chaotic primitives. You saw their ship. It is an abomination. Their society is a tumult. They are a risk we cannot calculate." "That is precisely the point," Kalen said, his voice rising with a passion that was distinctly unvelt. It drew startled looks from the council. "They are a risk we cannot calculate. They represent a variable our perfect models cannot account for. The galaxy is not a static system. New threats will emerge, threats that our linear logic cannot solve. The Gorg were a known quantity. What of the unknown? What of a threat that does not operate on logic at all? What then? We will try to analyze it to optimize a response, and we will fail because our very strength will become our weakness. We will be predictable." He took a step forward, his obsidian eyes scanning the impassive faces of the council. "The humans are unpredictable. They are creative. They are resilient. They can look at a problem from an angle we would never consider. They can take a tool designed for one purpose and use it for another in a way that defies explanation. They can stare into the abyss of certain failure and laugh. We need that, not to become like them, but to stand beside them, to let their chaos complement our order. Together, we would be more than the sum of our parts. Together, we would be unstoppable." The debate that followed was long and arduous. The council was deeply divided. The traditionalists, led by Xantos, saw humanity as a corruption, a pathogen that would introduce instability into the flawless organism of the hegemony. The progressives, a smaller faction led by Valoris, who was secretly intrigued by Kalen's arguments, saw the potential for a new kind of strength. They argued that a system that cannot incorporate new data is a dying system, that the hegemony's greatest strength, its stability, could also be its greatest vulnerability. For days, the argument raged in the highest echelons of Velt society. Kalen was subjected to intense questioning, his motives, his judgment, and even his mental stability scrutinized. He held firm, his conviction forged in the fire of his experiences. He was no longer the detached observer who had left Seraph Station. He had been changed. The final decision was not the full alliance Kalen had hoped for, but it was a monumental step. The Council, by a narrow margin, approved a proposal for a limited cooperative initiative. A single, jointly crewed outpost would be established in a neutral system. Velt and human scientists, engineers, and cultural observers would work side by side on a series of defined projects. It was a test, a trial run to see if the two diametrically opposed civilizations could coexist, let alone cooperate. When Kalen was informed of the decision, he felt a surge of that strange, human emotion, triumph. It was a fragile beginning, a tiny crack in the fortress wall of Velt tradition, but it was a start. He was assigned to lead the Velt contingent of the initiative. His first task was to select a location and oversee the construction of the outpost, which was to be named the Bridge. As he prepared to depart Seraph Station, he received a visitor. It was Counselor Valoris. She entered his quarters silently, her aged form moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Your report was disruptive, Director Kalen, she said, her voice softer than it had been in the conclave. You have shaken foundations that have stood for millennia. Foundations must be shaken if they are to be strengthened, Counselor, Kalen replied. She nodded slowly. Perhaps. The initiative has been approved, but you must understand the resistance you will face, not just from the Council, but from your own people. You are asking them to embrace everything they have been taught to reject. You are the point of the spear, Kalen. It will be a lonely and difficult position. I am not alone, Kalen said, and he realized it was true. He had the memory of a ramshackle ship and its stubborn crew. He had the taste of chocolate. He had the echo of their laughter. He had a glimpse of a different way to be. I have seen the unflinching sky, he said, more to himself than to her, and I am no longer afraid of its vastness. Valoris studied him for a long moment, and in her ancient eyes he saw not disapproval, but a flicker of something else, a faint, almost extinct spark of curiosity. Then go, she said, build your bridge, and may your logic, however unorthodox, prove to be correct. The future of the hegemony may well depend on it. As she left, Kalen turned to his viewport, looking out at the ordered splendor of the hegemony's core worlds. They were beautiful, like perfectly cut gems, but his gaze was drawn to the dark spaces between the stars, to the unknown, to the chaotic, vibrant, and unflinching sky where a species of welders and dreamers was waiting. He activated his comm. Open a channel to the indomitable spirit, he said. He had a proposition for Captain Riker. The star system designated K-17b was a testament to cosmic indifference. A dim red dwarf cast a bloody light upon a scattering of barren planetoids and a thick, radiation-choked asteroid belt. It was a place the Velt would have normally bypassed, a system with no strategic or resource value. Which was precisely why it had been chosen for the Bridge Initiative. It was neutral, unimportant, and far from the prying eyes of the more conservative elements of the hegemony. The construction of the outpost was itself a culture clash of epic proportions. The Velt plan was a masterpiece of prefabrication. A fleet of automated constructor ships arrived first, deploying nanites that swarmed over a large, stable asteroid, disassembling its material and reassembling it into a perfect geometric structure. The core of the outpost grew with silent, breathtaking speed, smooth white corridors, seamlessly integrated systems, a place of quiet efficiency. It was a miniature Seraph station. Then the human construction ship, the Daedalus, arrived. It was a massive, blocky vessel, trailing tendrils of cabling and surrounded by a cloud of smaller worker pods that buzzed around it like gnats. Where the Velt used nanites, the humans used plasma torches and rivet guns. The sound was deafening. They attached modular sections to the Velt core, but these sections were not seamless. They were bolted on, with visible joins and access panels everywhere. They built external gantries, sensor towers, and docking pylons that looked haphazard and temporary, though the humans insisted they were perfectly sound. Kalen observed from the command center of the growing station, a room that was a hybrid of Velt sleekness and human practicality. The walls were smooth, but they were covered in a riot of physical control panels, handwritten notes, and even a few pinned-up images of human landscapes. Captain Riker, now officially the human liaison for the initiative, stood beside him, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. Your people build a beautiful coffin, Director, Riker said, gesturing to the Velt sections. Ours build a messy home. You'll thank us for the access panels when a pipe bursts. The Velt sections do not have pipes that burst, Captain, Kalen replied, though he had learned enough to keep his tone dry rather than dismissive. Everything bursts eventually, Riker said with a wink. It's a universal constant. The real challenge began when the mixed crews started working together. The initial phase was marked by profound mutual frustration. The Velt scientists would present a research plan that was meticulously detailed, with every variable accounted for and every outcome predicted. The human scientists would agree and then immediately go off script, trying an alternative approach, just to see what happens. The Velt engineers would spend days analyzing the structural integrity of a new module, while the human engineers would have it welded into place in an afternoon and then hit it with a wrench to test its metal. Communication was a minefield. A Velt statement like, "The probability of success is low," was meant as a factual deterrent. The humans heard it as a challenge. A human statement like, "Let's give it a shot," was meant as optimistic can-do spirit. The Velt heard it as a confession of recklessness. Kalen found himself constantly mediating. He had to explain to his Velt staff that when a human said, "I have a bad feeling about this," it was not a superstition to be dismissed, but a synthesis of subconscious observation and intuition that often proved correct. He had to explain to the humans that the Velt's silence was not disapproval, but deep contemplation. The breakthrough came during a crisis. The outpost's primary power regulator, a Velt-designed masterpiece of crystalline technology, suffered a catastrophic failure. It was a 1 in a billion event, a flaw in the quantum lattice that had gone undetected through millennia of use. The station was plunged into emergency power. Life support was failing. The Velt engineers were baffled. Their diagnostics could only tell them that the unit had failed. Their protocol was to replace it, but the replacement unit was weeks away. Ben Carter, leading the human engineering team, didn't bother with the diagnostics. He suited up, grabbed a toolkit, and went to look at the unit itself. The Velt chief engineer, Vorlon, was horrified. "It is a sealed system. Any attempt to open it will cause a total energy discharge." "It's already totaled," Carter grunted, his voice filtered through his suit's comm. "Might as well see if we can't untotal it." He proceeded, under Vorlon's terrified gaze, to cut open the housing with a plasma torch. Inside, the crystalline matrix was dark, a web of fractured light. Carter didn't try to understand the quantum physics. He looked at it as a mechanic looks at a broken engine. He saw a hairline fracture in the main conduction conduit, a fracture that was interrupting the power flow and causing a cascading failure. "We can't fix the crystal," he reported, "but we can bypass the fracture." He proposed running a superconductor cable around the damaged section, a crude, physical patch on a quantum-level problem. "It is impossible," Vorlon insisted. "The energy densities will vaporize any physical conduit. Not if we insulate it with a localized containment field," Dr. Thorne chimed in from the science lab. She had been analyzing the problem from a materials perspective. "We can use the same principle as the Markov-Kaporov generator, create a chaotic field to contain the energy just long enough for it to jump the gap." It was a mad plan. It combined Velt understanding of energy with human reckless ingenuity. It should not have worked, but under Kalen's authorization, they tried it. Carter and his team welded the cable into place, while Thorne and a team of Velt physicists calibrated a jury-rigged field generator to create a perfect, chaotic bubble around the repair. The moment they activated it, the entire station shuddered. Alarms blared, but the power flow stabilized. The lights flickered back to full brightness. Life support restored. The patch was holding. It was ugly, it was temporary, and it violated every principle of Velt engineering, but it worked. In the aftermath, the atmosphere on the station shifted. The Velt engineers looked at the humming, patched-up regulator with a kind of reverent horror. They had witnessed a miracle of improvised heresy. The human engineers clapped Carter on the back, celebrating a job well done. The shared victory, born of desperation and a fusion of their two worldviews, did more to build trust than any diplomatic initiative ever could. The scientific collaborations began to bear strange and wonderful fruit. A Velt geneticist, working with a human bioengineer, developed a new strain of food crop that could grow in the station's hydroponics bay with 10 times the yield. By incorporating a chaotic growth trigger the humans had discovered in a terrestrial weed. A human physicist, inspired by the seamless nature of Velt materials, developed a new theory of atomic cohesion that promised to revolutionize human manufacturing if they could ever learn to control it. The bridge was becoming more than a name. It was a living experiment, a place where order and chaos were learning to dance. Kalen walked its corridors, no longer just a director, but a facilitator of this impossible partnership. He saw Velt technicians learning to use human tools, their precise movements adapting to the more physical, hands-on work. He saw human scientists learning the value of meticulous data collection, their brilliant leaps of intuition now backed by rigorous proof. He spent more and more time with Riker and Thorn, sharing meals that were no longer a source of confusion, but of discovery. He learned to appreciate the complex flavors of human food, and they, in turn, tried the Velt nutrient paste, declaring it bland but efficient. They talked for hours about philosophy, about history, about the nature of consciousness. Kalen found himself explaining the Velt concept of the Great Unification, the peaceful merging of their world's nations into a single, logical entity. Riker listened, then said, "Sounds peaceful. But did you ever stop to think that maybe the arguments were the point, that the friction is what creates the spark?" One evening, standing in the observation deck that looked out over the bleak beauty of K-17b, Kalen spoke his thoughts aloud to Riker. "I have spent my life believing that the universe was a puzzle to be solved, that with enough data, enough logic, every question had an answer. You have shown me that some questions have multiple answers, that some puzzles are not meant to be solved, but to be experienced." Riker leaned against the railing, his profile outlined by the bloody light of the star. "We're not so different, you know. You look for patterns in the silence. We look for meaning in the noise. Maybe both are just ways of trying to feel a little less small in all this." He gestured at the infinite starfield. "You build perfect machines to last forever. We build messy lives because we know they won't. It's all just a different way of saying we were here." Kalen was silent, absorbing this. The Velt sought permanence. The humans sought significance. They were two sides of the same cosmic coin. The bridge was not just a place where two civilizations met. It was a place where two fundamental aspects of existence were reconciling. A notification chimed on Kalen's data slate. It was a priority message from the Hegemony Council. He opened it. The initial report on the bridge initiative's first 6 months was being reviewed. The data was promising. The joint projects were yielding unprecedented results. The crisis with the power regulator had been noted not as a failure, but as a stunning success of cross-species cooperation. The Council was impressed. They were authorizing an expansion of the initiative, more resources, more personnel. A second, larger outpost was being proposed. Kalen showed the message to Riker. The human captain read it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned, they're actually getting it." "It would seem so," Kalen said, a feeling of profound satisfaction settling over him. The spear point had not broken. The bridge was holding. The first fragile thread of a new future was being woven in this forgotten system, a future where the unflinching sky was not a void to be feared, but a canvas for both the perfect line and the beautiful, chaotic splash of color. The work was just beginning, but for the first time, Kalen felt no doubt. They were on the right path. It was messy, illogical, and utterly human. And it was, against all odds, working. 5 standard cycles had transformed the K-17b system from a cosmic backwater into a beacon of unprecedented cooperation. The bridge had expanded from a single outpost into a small, thriving complex, a physical manifestation of the Velt-Human alliance. New modules, designed from the ground up by joint teams, sprouted from the original structure, a blend of Velt elegance and human rugged practicality. The silent corridors now echoed with a mixture of the precise tones of Velt and the lively, inflected speech of humans. It was no longer just an experiment, it was a community. Director Kalen, now the permanent head of the initiative, reviewed the latest data streams in his office. The reports were staggering. The collaborative projects had accelerated at an exponential rate. The Chaos-Assisted Quantum Computing Project, which used controlled instability to solve problems deemed intractable by pure Velt logic, had just cracked a protein-folding model that promised to revolutionize medicine for both species. The Adaptive Hull Material Project, combining Velt molecular bonding with human self-repairing polymer concepts, had produced a starship plating that could redistribute impact energy and heal minor breaches. They were creating technologies that neither species could have conceived of alone. The cultural exchange had deepened as well. Velt was studying human music and art, not with clinical detachment, but with a growing appreciation for the emotional data streams they represented. Some had even been seen attempting to create their own illogical art, with awkward but sincere results. Humans, in turn, were embracing Velt meditation and logical disciplines, finding that a measure of internal order could enhance their own creative processes. The station's common areas were a fascinating mix. A game of three-dimensional chess might be played next to a loud, physical game of human origin involving paddles and a small, fast-moving ball. Kalen himself had changed. He still carried himself with Velt precision, but his thought processes had become more fluid. He no longer sought the single, perfect solution, but the range of possible solutions, weighing their merits not just on efficiency, but on resilience, adaptability, and even, on occasion, on the well-being of the individuals involved. He had learned the value of a gut feeling, that synthesis of subconscious data his human colleagues relied upon. He was, in the most fundamental way, evolving. His comlink chimed. It was Jackson, his former second, now the head of the station's tactical and security division, a role that had become largely administrative, given the peace of the initiative. But Jackson's voice was sharp, laced with an urgency Kalen had never heard before. Director, we have an unscheduled metaspace translation at the system's edge. Multiple contacts. Their signatures are unknown. Kalen was on his feet instantly. On my way. The command center was a model of controlled calm, but the tension was palpable. On the main viewer, a swarm of ships had appeared. They were like nothing in the hegemony databases. They were organic in form, looking less like constructed vessels and more like grown carapaces, jagged and asymmetrical. They moved not in formation, but in a swirling, chaotic cloud, yet their vector was unmistakable. They were heading directly for the bridge. Attempting communication, a Velt officer reported. Broadcasting standard peace glyphs and mathematical primes, no response. They are broadcasting on all frequencies, but it is not language, it is a signal, a pattern of pure data. The data stream appeared on a secondary screen. It was a complex, repeating algorithm, a sequence of optimization commands. It was a command to become more efficient, to shed inefficiencies, to eliminate waste. It's a virus, Leo, who was manning the human sensor station, said, his face pale. A logical virus. It's not trying to talk to us, it's trying to reformat us. As they watched, the lead alien vessel extended a proboscis-like appendage and fired a beam of coherent energy at a small, automated Velt survey probe that was in its path. The probe did not explode. It changed. Its smooth, white hull reconfigured, its components shifting and merging, shedding its sensors and comms array as inefficient. In moments, it was transformed into a perfect, featureless sphere of metal, which then drifted, inert and useless. They don't want to destroy us, Kalen realized with a chill. They want to perfect us, to strip away everything they deem unnecessary, including us. Shields to maximum, Riker barked, having arrived on the command center at a run. All hands, battle stations, this is not a drill. He looked at Kalen, his expression grim. Your perfect logic, Director, they've taken it to its ultimate, horrifying conclusion. They're the universe's Tidias. The alien fleet, which the computers had designated the Optimizers, surged forward. Their weapons were not lasers or plasma. They were transformation beams. Where they struck the bridge's shields, the shield projectors themselves began to falter, their complex systems being simplified into inert crystal. The Velt systems, built on perfect, predictable logic, were incredibly vulnerable. The optimizer's virus found the core algorithms and rewrote them, turning defense into docility. Our weapons are ineffective, Jackson reported. Their ships adapt to our energy signatures. They optimize their own shields to perfectly counter our attacks. We cannot penetrate them. Panic began to flicker in the command center. This was the nightmare scenario Kalen had warned the Council about, a threat that could not be defeated by linear logic. The Velt's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. They were fighting a reflection of their own ideals, twisted into a monstrous, devouring form. Director, they're breaking through the outer defensive grid. They'll be in weapons range of the station in 3 minutes. Kalen felt a cold certainty settle over him. This was the test, the reason for the bridge. He turned to Riker. Captain, the station is yours. Riker didn't hesitate. He moved to the central command console. All Velt personnel cease offensive actions, divert all power to station keeping and life support. Let them think you're shutting down. All human crews to your stations. Ben, I need the Markov Kaporov field generators, all of them, tied into the main power grid. Leo, I want you to get into their data stream. Don't try to break it. Don't try to fight it. Join it. Feed it our chaos. It was a plan of sublime insanity. As the Velt systems went quiet, the optimizers focused their attention on the human sections of the station, which were now glowing with wild, unstable energy. Beams of transformative energy lanced out, striking the bolted-on, messy human modules. But the chaos field generators flared to life, surrounding the station in a shimmering, unpredictable haze. The optimizer beams struck the chaos field and splintered. They couldn't get a lock. The field had no stable pattern to optimize. It was like trying to tidy a hurricane. Meanwhile, Leo was feeding the optimizer's data stream a torrent of human nonsense. He sent it jokes, poetry, pictures of kittens, love songs, scientific theories that contradicted themselves, philosophical paradoxes. He sent it the entire, glorious, messy dataset of human existence. The optimizer fleet, which had been moving with a single-minded purpose, began to stutter. Their swirling cloud formation broke apart. Some ships started broadcasting music. Others began reconfiguring their own hulls into aesthetically pleasing but utterly useless shapes. The virus of pure logic was being infected by the virus of humanity. Now, Jackson, Riker shouted, hit them with everything we've got, but don't use a standard firing pattern. Randomize it, make it ugly. The station's remaining weapons, now powered by the unstable chaos field, opened fire. The blasts were wild, unaimed, and completely unpredictable. They didn't target the enemy's shields. They targeted the empty space around them, the gaps in their formation, the weak points that only a chaotic, intuitive mind could perceive. The optimizer ships, their logical processing overwhelmed by the contradictory data, couldn't adapt. The blasts struck home. One by one, the organic carapaces shattered, unable to optimize against an attack that had no logic. The lead optimizer vessel, larger than the rest, seemed to shake off the confusion. It gathered its energy for a final, massive transformation beam aimed directly at the station's core. It was going to try and perfect the entire bridge in one shot. Ben, we need a bigger surge, Riker yelled. Another one and we'll blow the core. Carter's voice came back strained. Do it, Kalen and Riker said in unison. Carter rerouted all remaining power, Velt and human, through the chaos generators. The field intensified, becoming a storm of light and distortion. The optimizer fired its beam. The two forces met in a silent, titanic struggle between absolute order and absolute chaos. For a moment, the orderly beam began to force its way through, simplifying the chaos, turning it into a predictable pattern. The station groaned under the strain. And then, Dr. Thorne, who had been monitoring the interaction from the science lab, had an idea. Don't fight it, guide it, use their own energy, feed it back into their pattern. Leo understood instantly. He took the optimizer's own transformation algorithm, the command to become efficient, and fed it back into the beam, but he modulated it with a human variable. He introduced a single, illogical command, feel. The result was instantaneous. The optimizer's beam, amplified and reflected by the chaos field and infected with its own corrupted logic, slammed back into the lead ship. The vessel didn't transform into a sphere. It blossomed. Its jagged carapace unfolded like a flower, its components reconfiguring not into efficiency, but into a thing of bizarre, beautiful, and utterly useless complexity. It hung in space for a moment, a piece of cosmic origami, and then fell silent, its systems frozen in a state of aesthetic, inefficient grace. The remaining optimizer ships, their central command gone, their logical purpose subverted, drifted aimlessly, some self-destructed, unable to process their new reality, others simply powered down, becoming inert sculptures in the void. Silence returned to the command center of the bridge. The threat was over. They had won. Not with superior firepower, but with a weapon the enemy could not comprehend, their own combined, chaotic, and unbreakable spirit. Jackson turned to Kalen, his usual composure gone, replaced by a look of raw awe. We survived. We defeated them. No, Kalen said softly, looking at Riker, at Thorn on the comm screen, at Leo and Ben. We did not merely survive. We evolved. He looked out the viewport at the drifting, flower-like husk of the Optimizer Command ship. They were the ultimate expression of order. We are the synthesis, order and chaos, logic and intuition, the perfect line and the beautiful mess. Together, we are what comes next. He opened a channel to the entire station, to the Velt and human crew who had stood together against the unthinkable. This is Director Kalen. The immediate threat has been neutralized. You have all performed illogically, courageously, and perfectly. You have not just defended a station. You have defended a future worth fighting for, a future worth living in. Thank you. Across the station, the silence was broken not by cheers, but by a profound, shared feeling of triumph. Velt and Human looked at each other, and in that moment, the differences did not matter. They were crew. They were colleagues. They were, in a way that transcended biology or philosophy, family. Later, as the recovery operations began, Kalen stood once more on the observation deck with Riker. The debris field of the Optimizers glittered in the light of the red dwarf, a cemetery of a failed ideology. You were right, you know, Riker said, his voice quiet. Back on the Envoy, you said we were a solvent. I think we just dissolved the biggest problem this galaxy has ever seen. No, Kalen corrected him gently. We did not dissolve it. We integrated it. We took its strength and made it our own. That is the true power of the bridge. It is not a wall to keep things out or a filter to let only certain things through. It is a connection. It allows for flow, for change. He looked at Riker, and for the first time he allowed a genuine, unguarded smile to touch his features. It felt strange. It felt good. The hegemony sought to build a perfect, unchanging garden, but life is not a garden. It is a wilderness. And it is in the wilderness that the strongest things grow. Riker clapped him on the shoulder, a very human gesture that Kalen no longer flinched from. Well, Director, it looks like we've got ourselves one hell of a wilderness to explore. Kalen nodded, turning his gaze back to the starfield. The unflinching sky was no longer a cold, empty void. It was filled with potential, with mystery, with the promise of infinite, chaotic, and beautiful possibilities. And for the first time in his long, ordered life, Kalen felt no desire for answers. He only looked forward to the questions, the great, glorious human questions that stretched out before them, leading into an unwritten future, a future they would build together.